what's the legacy of the current Liberal Prime Minister? Well, sadly, his entire legacy amounts to one thing. This Prime Minister has grown the national debt more in 9 years than under every other Prime Minister in Canadian history before him combined. That's his legacy. That's the end of it. That is the only thing that he stands and has as a legacy. And that debt now stands at $1.3 trillion. That's an enormous number. It's actually hard to comprehend or even to imagine for, I think, just about any Canadian. It's really hard to visualize how much money we're even talking about there. So I want to break that down just a little bit. First of all, our national debt of $1.3 trillion is relative to a $2 trillion national economy. So for every dollar the Canadian economy generates, about 65 cents of it has an obligation attached to it. Now, $1 trillion is a massive amount of money. If you cashed it into $100 bills and you stack those bills into billion-dollar piles, you'd have 1,000 piles, each climbing about 1 kilometer high. That's what we're talking about in terms of what this money would look like. But that's still viewing the situation from 20,000 feet. So let's zoom in at the ground level for a little bit better perspective. For Canada's population of about 39 million people, the share of the total national debt is now about $34,000 for every person in the country. So for every family of 5 in Canada, there's about $170,000 in debt. So if you think about what that could mean for the average Canadian family of 5, with that $170,000, what could they do with that money if they had that for themselves instead of it being their share of the national debt? Let's say you have kids in hockey. Well, a reasonably decent youth composite hockey stick that everyone uses nowadays, it's about $90 or so. So the kids in that family of 5 would certainly never have to worry about breaking a hockey stick ever again. In fact, every one of their friends would never have to worry about it again either, because that $170,000 would buy about 1,800 hockey sticks. Now, a family of 5 can easily spend $400 or more a week on groceries these days with all the inflation. So that means that $170,000 would cover food for that whole family for over 8 years. Instead, under the Liberals, Canadian families are struggling to feed themselves. Food banks in Canada have received a record 2 million visits in a single month last year, with 1 million additional people expected this year. The examples of what Canadians could do with their own money is endless, but those dollars are not enriching those Canadian families at all under this Liberal government. Those dollars represent the money that's owed to bankers and bondholders as their share of the Prime Minister's debt. So it's interesting to be able to visualize that, but it's not a theoretical exercise. It's actually having real impacts on Canadians right now, here today. The Prime Minister's inflationary deficits are driving up interest rates, and he's endangering our social safety nets and our jobs by adding more inflationary debt. His government has caused rent and mortgage payment costs to double. They've made it harder to save for a down payment for so many young families who are just dreaming of getting into the housing market for the first time and wondering how that'll ever be possible. So those are the problems facing Canada right now, Madam Speaker. But what is the fix? Well, common sense Conservatives have solutions. In fact, we've offered the Liberals a starting point to fix it. We told the Prime Minister that we would support his budget if he would just take 3 very simple steps, just small little steps towards addressing the affordability issues that are plaguing Canadians by starting to address the debt. So we needed to see this Liberal government at minimum axe the Liberal tax on food, focus on building homes and not building up more federal government bureaucracy, and to cap the out-of-control government spending by finding $1 in savings for every new dollar in spending. But the Liberals did none of that. Instead, they went further down the road of recklessness, of adding $40 billion more to the growing federal debt. Common sense Conservatives cannot support a budget that continues to further in-debt Canadians. And we will vote non-confidence in a Prime Minister that has driven this country into the ground. Now, I want to know, will the NDP have the backbone to do the same? The government needs to be run in the same way that people have to run their households. A Canadian family that found itself paying more on their credit card debt and on interest than on their necessities would quickly realize that they have to address their debt load. But this government, in a similar circumstance, chooses to open new lines of credit to keep on spending. If the government approached budgeting the way Canadian households have to, with actual needs weighed against available resources, the craziness of paying more to bankers and bondholders in 1 year than what it funds the provinces for health care would be apparent to every single other Canadian but the people sitting over on those benches over there in that Liberal government. Under this government, the promise of Canada has become a promissory note to its debt holders. The Liberals have tried to rebrand their undisciplined fiscal policy as equal to the aspirations of Canadians. But let's look at the real promise of Canada. It's not the agenda of bigger government that this government promotes. It's certainly not about transforming society to reflect Liberal ideology, despite what Liberals would have people believe. The promise of Canada is, in fact, about opportunities and freedoms to forge one's way in life. Canada has long held out the hope of achievement and prosperity for those who do the work and follow the rules. That a comfortable, secure, middle-class existence is open to anyone from any walk of life, from anywhere in the world that works to earn it. But in year 9 of this government, life in Canada has never been more unaffordable. And the middle class is just a distant dream for far too many. And Canadians looking for the Liberals to change things in their budget this year must be feeling incredibly disappointed. Reckless spending, deeper debt and deficits, and of course their harmful carbon tax. With these and other policies, Liberals are fueling inflation and an affordability crisis, and pushing middle-class aspirations even further out of the reach of many. Struggling families can't afford more inflationary spending that drives up their cost of living. They can't afford the interest rates on their mortgage, their taxes, all of these things. And even Liberal spending on social programs is not as it actually seems. Many of the measures announced in the budget are deferred, so the government can make feel-good promises now and then try to find loopholes to get out of it later. We've seen that with the dental care and other social spending that they've rolled out that didn't quite come anywhere near as advertised. We're seeing it with defense spending promises that stretch out 20 years into the future when they're needed now. After 9 years, the Liberals' budget is just more of the same that got us into this mess in the first place. This Prime Minister is proving he's not worth the cost for any generation, and it will be generations well into the future that will have to repay all of his debt. It's clear that only common sense Conservatives have a plan to stop the inflationary deficits that are driving up interest rates. We'll protect Canada's social programs and jobs by stopping the piling on of more federal debt. Only common sense Conservatives have a plan to bring down the cost of energy, food, and everything else. We'll axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Conservatives will govern with common sense for this country, for all its people, in all its regions. And Canada's middle-class dream can once again eclipse the Liberals' debt and deficits nightmare. Thank you, Madam Speaker.